Hi, welcome to this week's Authors Love Readers podcast, where we delve into the stories behind the stories. We're asking authors questions, some of them fun, some of them serious, and from their answers, you're going to learn things you never knew about the people who write the stories you love. My name is Patricia McLinn. I'm your host and designated question asker.
I'm Kevin Tumlinson, and I'm an author who loves readers.
Now, let's start the show. Hi, and welcome to this week's edition of Authors Love Readers podcast. My guest today is Kevin Tumlinson. Now, I know Kevin in his other world, working for an organization called Draft to Digital, which does a lot of great things and helps authors in many ways. But we wanted to talk to Kevin today in his writer guise and hear about that side of his life. So I'm going to ask you, first of all, Kevin, to tell us a little bit about what you write.
Oh, I'm happy to talk about that. It's kind of nice to put on my writer pants for once.
Got to pull those up.
Got to get them up. And writer and pants, that doesn't really go well together. That's sort of.
Oh, it does for me. I'm a pantser.
I am a total pantser myself, actually. So I am, at the moment, I primarily write archaeological thrillers right now. I started my career writing sci-fi, and I wrote some YA fantasy. But I was back in 2016, which it's hard to say things like way back in 2016. I was dared on air on a podcast to write a thriller, and I gave it a shot, and it ended up doing incredibly well. And I fell in love with the genre. So I've been writing, archaeological thrillers ever since. So sort of along the lines of like a Dan Brown, Da Vinci Code kind of thing.
So I had multiple questions about that. So you had not really read very many thrillers before that?
Oh, actually, I had read quite a few. I'm a very wide reader. I mean, I'll read just about anything. So I had read quite a few. I really enjoyed Da Vinci Code. I enjoyed everything Dan Brown wrote. I enjoyed Steve Barry, James Rollins, and Lee Child, guys like that. I had watched movies, and I had watched television shows. I had a love for that kind of story, but I had never written anything in that genre per se. So it was a fun shift, though.
And why archaeological?
I actually am. I'm kind of an amateur anthropologist. I love. I study history. I study humanity. I'm a big. I dig deep into. I'm a big fan of humans. I guess I dig deep into. How we became who we are. I'm fascinated by the sort of mysteries of history. The things that are the quirky little twists of history that just are they're titillating. They're these little touches of there could be something really incredible happening there, but we just don't know because it's buried in history. The what ifs of history. So that sort of thing. The archaeological thrillers appeal to me because there's so much to mine there. Like I can now the type of archaeological thriller I write. It gets compared to like Indiana Jones and the stuff that Clive Cussler writes, the Dirk Pitt stuff. Mm-hmm. But it's not. My protagonist is a much more contemporary. I like to joke that he has superpowers in the form of multiple PhDs and lots of money. He's just, he's one of these inquisitive minds. I also love to tell people that I base the character on me. I'm going to just go ahead and say loosely on me. Because,
swashbuckler.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't spend a whole lot of time crawling around in Mayan tombs and, dodging bullets.
Okay. What is the name of the series?
I call them the Dan Kotler archaeological thrillers. Very straightforward.
And I would normally wait until later on to ask you this, but it's comes organically here. Let's talk about the research a little bit, because I would think it's going to be something that you've got to get things right.
You do, although I cheat. because what
Oh,
I
good. How
do.
do you do that?
So here's how this works. First of all, I have a great love for reading history, biographies. Watch a lot of history on television. I used to work in film and TV. I did documentary television, so I used to do a lot of research for that. The way I cheat, though, is I use the historic component of the story as a kind of setup, and I give you some detail about that. And laced throughout the book will be little bits of historic detail, but the story itself isn't actually about that historic event. It's more about um, some contemporary threat that's tied in with that history. So if someone were to say find a Nazi U-boat, I would give you some background on Nazi U-boats, but I would not necessarily make the story about Nazi U-boats. So you only need a nice veneer of history.
Mm. But how about the scientific and technological details of retrieving that Nazi?
Again, I mean, this all comes back to me being sort of an amateur anthropologist and an amateur quantum physicist of sorts. I have an engineering background, so I read everything. I read history. I read science journals. I read, these deep set articles that go take deep dives into one aspect of science or history or another, and I just sort of keep all that stuff in the back of my head. I always have. So I know where to find it when I need to find it. I remember specific details, and then I go dig in on details I may be missing. I have a rather large library of resources I've gathered over the years. Also everything from old textbooks to I've got scans of old journal articles. I used to use Evernote, but I've shifted now to Apple's little note app. I've got notes just crammed full of articles and photos. And, every time I travel, I take photos of, just about everything I encounter. So the research actually happens. It doesn't happen specifically for each book. It generally happens as I go about my everyday life. I gather these materials knowing one day I'll put those to use.
Yeah, so you have the sort of you have the background
Yeah.
of the landscape that you have absorbed from various sources,
Right.
and then do you go and research the specifics you need for that
Right.
story?
Right. And
Yeah.
I have a background. I have a very eclectic background. You're going to hear me say things like, I have a background in X, Y, Z. I have a background in media, of course, radio and television, and the podcast more recently. And so, I'm very comfortable with interviewing people. So I have gotten on the phone and done informational interviews. Surprisingly easy to do. You kind of just have to become comfortable with talking to a stranger or an expert and asking questions. Some people are terrified by that. I'm perfectly comfortable with that.
So, yeah, from my journalism background, I love doing that.
Yeah.
And I love the tidbits that you get from people
Right.
that you didn't know to ask for.
Right. Yeah, I'll let people just
and
talk.
Yeah.
I ask a priming question, and then I kind of just keep it going. And I'm recording, so I don't even have to worry about taking notes. I record those calls so that I can go back through them. But 9 times out of 10, I don't actually have to go back through the call. I can remember everything that I wanted to, pull out of it.
That's really interesting that you record too, because one of the things I did at my second book had an Irish hero, and I had been in Ireland, I guess just as I was beginning to write it, and I asked people permission to record some just ordinary conversations because I wanted to get that rhythm and the syntax in my head and be able to bring his dialogue across as Irish without using Faith and Begorra and that sort of cliche. And it is interesting, and with you recording the people for research, I bet you're picking up a lot of that too. How things are phrased,
nomenclature, even terminology, the new terminology. I'll be exposed to that, but even things that I am already aware of. But they'll sometimes, because they're exposed to their peers and people in their specific niche. Sometimes they'll have a cadence to what they say. They'll pronounce things in a different way.
Yes.
And sometimes that stuff doesn't necessarily translate to the page. But I feel like having that, it gives me sort of an insider's view of this person's specialty. And
I think the cadence probably does. I think you pick it up in your head and and it comes out and it just feels right, and you can tell when a piece of dialogue is hit, if it hits the wrong note, if it kind of gets off.
Right. Yeah. Because we write in rhythms. Storytelling is a rhythm.
Yeah.
When people talk about voice, they're almost always talking about rhythm. They're always talking about, the sort of tempo of what they're reading, in the way the author wrote it, and picking up those cadences and that rhythm from the people I talk to, not just in phone calls and that sort of thing. I get out in the world occasionally, amongst the
they let you outside.
What I call it is going and being with the three-dimensional people. Because we spend a lot of time indoors. I love, this is one of the reasons I travel as much as I do. One of the reasons I connected, and I think you briefly mentioned Draft to Digital, the company that I do some work with. I don't have to work with Draft to Digital. That's what's amazing about this arrangement. But one of the benefits to being with them is they actually will send me to places quite often, as their representative, but I get to go, basically as an author. And while I'm there, I take advantage. I mean, the whole time I'm there, I'm talking to other authors. I'm promoting Draft Digital stuff. I'm also learning and growing. And then I venture out from the hotels and go meet people and see things and experience things that I might not otherwise have been exposed to. And it feeds right into my work.
Now, a lot of us as authors consider ourselves introverts. Some are extreme introverts. Would you consider yourself as an introvert?
I know you're not going to agree with me, but I am actually what I refer to as a high-functioning introvert.
I wouldn't disagree with you, actually. I would, because I say sort of, you may be, I refer to myself as a sociable introvert.
Yeah. So I am an introvert to the degree that I don't mind being by myself and spending large quantities of time alone. Mm-hmm. I get to a point where I feel like I need to get out and interact with other humans, and I'll do that. But I'm also that guy who will be in the crowd of other people. I'll be out in a public place, and I'm essentially just by myself. I'm walking among 2,000 other people here, but it's just me, And what happens is at the end of a day, if I'm at a conference or something, while I'm at a conference or while I'm out engaging with people, with readers or with other authors, I get a certain amount of energy from that. But then there's a point where I shut down. My wife, she knows me so well. Like, she can see it. We'll be out, especially if we're at a big family gathering. We've got a whole bunch of family. In fact, people are starting to pick up on it in the family. But she knows when we're out in public, she watches it happen. Like, there's a kind of shift. All of a sudden, Kevin's energy shifts from, he's having a good time, he's leading the conversation, he's, joking, to where'd Kevin go? He's and I usually head for the men's room. Funny enough, the men's room is that's my getaway when I need to just chill and just shut down for just a few minutes to get those introvert batteries at least back up to a level that I can get through the rest of the evening. I slip off and hang out in the men's room for a few minutes. It's usually a fairly quiet place, not always the most desirable place, but it's usually a fairly quiet place.
If you're like at the Romance Writers of America, it's a really good place. But if you're at that conference, lots of women.
I'm practically there by myself. So
I used to go up to my room and take what I called cranky breaks, where I would sit and I would usually eat chocolate and drink. At that time, I drank the soft drink Tab, and I would not smile. I would purposely keep my whole face neutral, and take 4 or 5 minutes, and then I could go back.
This sort of fugue state, you know. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we've gotten way off, but this is fun. Okay.
That's what we do. That's what happens when I come on a show.
I am not going to ask you the surprising jobs you've held question, because I think you've hinted at.
How much time did you say we have?
What's your top choice for your surprising job you've held? Let's do that one.
That's actually quite a tough question. I mean, you know, like I said, I did a little bit of PI work early on in my 20s. I've performed a few weddings here and there. Those are kind of surprising. It's a really difficult question to answer because a lot of what I did before I started writing full time was just sort of happened. I'm one of these people that's just, I'm interested in so many different things. I tend to dig in and try to find a way to do that work for a while.
If you were not writing, is there one of those jobs that you would go back to?
No, I don't think I would go back to any of them. Maybe radio. I've thought about radio. I liked being on the air, and this is why I do my podcast now. If I weren't the one having to produce the show, it would certainly be a lot easier and a lot more fun.
And tell us the name of the show. My
current show is the Wordslinger podcast, which is, I primarily talk to mostly other authors, but I talk to really anyone. I'll talk to anyone. I tell people the show is focused on entrepreneurs and authors, but the honest truth is I started the show so that I had an excuse to talk to people I admired and found it inspiring and people I thought I could learn from. And so I honestly feel like the show could appeal to just anyone who has any curiosity about how people do what they do. But I do talk to a lot of authors. I've talked to some pretty, well-known authors. Just recently, the most recent famous author was Steve Barry, another thriller writer. I talked to Andy Weir like a month before the Martian came out in theaters, so that was fun.
Wow!
So those are. It's been a great experience for me. It is a holdover. I used to work in radio years ago. I actually got to talk to Dan Brown before he was Dan Brown, like way back when he only had like one book out, and no one.
He was already Dan Brown, nobody knew he was Dan Brown.
Up and coming as Dan Brown. He actually mentions in Angels and Demons, his first Robert Langdon book. Mm-hmm. He actually, in the foreword, he acknowledges and thanks Tom King's CompuTalk. That's the radio show I was on. So we got a little mention at the front of that book. So,
well, that's nice. Okay, let's let the readers get to know you better.
Absolutely.
Or the listeners get to know you better. So we'll start with, do you have any strong fears, and do you use them in books?
I don't I'm not really the type of person who has actual strict phobias. There are things that do sort of chill me at times. I will freak myself out in the middle of the night, right? I remember one night lying in bed. This was before I was married. I was single, lying in bed. My cat, unbeknownst to me, had slipped down, and I had next to my bed was a mirrored closet door, one of those like they slide open, Oh yeah. And I'm laying there. I woke up. I look over, and I'm just for some reason I'm just taken with the moonlight reflecting off of this glass, and then suddenly the door starts sliding open at like 2 a.m. And of course, I don't know what to do at this point. I don't know if I should get up, but I go ahead and get up. I look and I notice my cat has pawed the door open, So I don't have specific fears, but I will.
Okay. Are you going to use that in a book someday?
I have used that in a book.
Okay. Otherwise, I was going to grab it.
Feel free. I also
no, you've already
at one point woke up and I thought, how creepy would it be if suddenly just a child's laughter started coming out of my closet at 2 a.m? Like, how creepy would that be?
So you were anticipating Alexa.
I was. Alexa is a freak, man. That whole maniacal laugh thing.
Sudden laughter.
Yeah, that is if I have a fear at all, it's that. It's that the world goes upside down crazy and all our technology turns on us in like weirdly demonic ways. That would probably be my one fear. I do have a fear now that I mentioned that. I mean, I do have a fear, and it's a kind of grounded fear, I guess. I have this fear of sort of losing my mind, losing, Alzheimer's and that sort of thing. That's my fear. And I haven't specifically used that, but I have characters who, they deal with phobias and things. And I think it's kind of along the same thing. One of my characters in the Dan Kotler series, Roland Denzel, he's the FBI partner in the series, and he is he's claustrophobic, and not severely. I don't think he's. I think he's probably less claustrophobic than he thinks, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
because he gets through it pretty easily. But I actually in my most current book gave some backstory as to why he's like that, and he's got some legitimate reasons for it. So, but I try not to do the whole fear thing. I try not to play around with that too much with my characters, because I don't want to minimize that for people. I don't want to, I don't want to treat that as if it's no big deal. I worry about that with Denzel's claustrophobia. I'm actually thinking of phasing it out because or having him deal with it and overcome it or something. Because what I don't want is someone who does suffer from claustrophobia to read that and think, well, he just bit down on his belt and got through it, and I'm terrified to go in my closet. I don't want that.
Yeah. That you were dismissive
is probably the right word.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody to think that I don't have a respect for that kind of thing, because I do understand. I used to, oddly enough, I'm just too damn stubborn to have phobias. I mean, when I was a very young kid, I got attacked by a bulldog. The story my mom tells is that the thing just half ripped off my head. My ear had to be sewn back on, that sort of thing. Not completely. Okay. Let me just dial back the gruesome just a tad. I got bit by a dog. And then years later in my 20s, I was attacked by this, Rottweiler pit bull mix. And I still have scars from that. And I really thought, for a while there, every time I heard a loud dog barking, there was that little spike of fear. And then somehow, some way, I completely got past it. And I can't explain why, but I really thought that was going to become a thing. Like, twice and you've got a phobia. But no, it never really did. It just, I don't think I'm all that brave sometimes. I think I'm kind of I can get terrified by certain things.
Well, I've been around dogs a lot in my life, and I tend to worry more about the ones that don't bark.
Yes, the quiet ones that just watch you. Yes. Yeah, but I think that's respect. I think that's less fear and more respect. Just like I would respect if someone placed a loaded weapon on the table in front of me. I know how to handle guns. I'm okay with guns. But if I wouldn't touch that person's weapon because I respect it and I respect what it's capable of. And I think it's the same thing, with just about any phobia, really. I think, we learn to respect the thing that we fear, and then it's less about the fear and more about, we don't want to push things, or we don't want to misstep, or we want to show respect.
Well, let's get a little lighter here. What's your favorite color, Kevin? And why do you associate something with it?
That has shifted numerous times over my life. I find that odd. I think my current favorite color is actually yellow, which is
I like
weird.
Yellow.
Yeah, well, it went from, I used to love purple. My wife loves purple now, but then it was green for a time, and then it was this kind of orangish bronze color, and now it's yellow. And I don't know why. I don't know why it shifts, but that's it seems like I go an awful lot between orange and yellow these days.
I like those. I like those a lot. What is the why?
I don't have a strict why. It was more of a, there's something about those colors, yellow in particular. Yellow is an unusual color to be someone's favorite color. And it has a warm feeling to it. And it also, in terms of like the way I use it, because I use that color now as part of my brand for Wordslinger, for some of my books. And it has a sort of warning vibe to it. So for the thrillers, it works out great. I mean, it's a good color because it can kind of say danger,
Caution
just
signs.
as caution, right? Yeah.
Well, that's very interesting. And yellow is one of the colors I really like, but I tend to think of it as bright and sunny because I like a lot of sunlight. And but it does have that cautionary. Yeah, isn't that interesting? A lot of them are.
Yeah, they are.
So, what's your favorite taste?
I like savory. Like I know, and I have loved my fair share of sweets in my life. If you look at me in person, you can tell that I have enjoyed sweets in my life. But I like savory, strong. I'm a big fan of strong flavors. I drink my coffee black. I like licorice. These very strong flavors. Licorice tends to be sweet, but I mean, I will taste things because they're pungent. I like very strong cheeses, blue cheese and gorgonzola and things like that. I like that. But yeah, basically anything kind of strong and savory is usually a favorite of mine.
But do you have anything from earlier on in your life that you used to get worried about or concerned about, and now you just say, doesn't work. Besides dogs.
No, funny enough, I used to worry quite a bit about. I'm a Christian. Okay, I used to worry quite a bit about the rapture. Like I was going to wake up and everyone was taken, and I was left behind. Oh. So I don't know why.
and did you do something to get over that, or did it just happen as
I think it just gradually. I still occasionally will. If, for example, I wake up and my wife is not in bed, there will be that brief moment where I think, "Did it happen? Is this it? Am I on my own now? Am I going to have to fight?" But now it's apocalyptic stuff. Thanks Walking Dead. Everything's about the apocalypse now, and so now I think I have this. And it's not a fear, but it's more of I'm sort of always prepared to wake up and discover that the apocalypse has happened and I'm one of the few remaining, and now I've got to fight to survive. But that may be more about me being a writer than anything.
Yeah, we do tend to go into the what ifs, don't we?
Yeah.
Was there a childhood book or a book when you were younger that you think really got you hooked into the writer way of thinking or addicted you to story?
Yes. And so I used to read everything, but one of my favorite series of books when I was a kid was Encyclopedia Brown. And I think that's where that may be. I don't know if that caused this or if it was a result of this, but I have a great love for brilliance, for people who are just geniuses. And not necessarily that they are naturally geniuses. I particularly love it when someone has sort of, mind hacked themselves and made themselves extraordinary. And I think it all started there. And I think in a lot of respects, Dan Kotler is essentially Encyclopedia Brown all grown up and out chasing terrorists and murderers. But I also read Judy Blume books and Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing and Super Fudge. Those books were part of my DNA growing up. I read anything I could get my hands on, honestly. And that was quite a bit, thankfully. Where I grew up, my grandfather was an avid reader of Louis L'Amour, so I read a lot of those books.
Mm.
But no, I'd say Encyclopedia Brown was probably one of those really influential books on me as a kid. And then later, Orson Scott Card's Ender's Game was what made me decide to be a writer. I mean, that's what made me wake up and realize that human beings write books. Human beings are responsible for these things. I'm a human being, therefore I can write one of these. And from that point forward, I pretty much was on the path. I'd been writing for years before then, but that was when I realized I could do it as a career.
And you started with sci-fi?
Yes, initially I was a sci-fi writer. I still sort of am, I think. So I'm a character writer. It really doesn't matter what the setting is. I honestly think that, I could probably write anything. I'm only going to write the things that I feel passionate about and interested in. But it took me a while to come around on the sci-fi versus thriller thing, to be honest, because I went to the Nebula Awards, and I'm a member of SIFWA, and I'm talking to these people, and this is kind of mecca for sci-fi writers, right? This is one of the events that when I was growing up, I saw on the covers of the books that I loved to read, would be Nebula and Hugo Awards.
Yeah.
So I go to the Nebulas and I'm talking to people, and everyone wants to talk about sci-fi. And I had recently started writing thrillers on top of my sci-fi, and I quickly realized I don't actually want to talk about my sci-fi. I want to talk about these thrillers. And so I had that aha moment,
That's interesting. We don't always know where we're going, or
right,
or where we already are. Sometimes we need, but you need something to recognize that.
You need something that does sort of prompt it, the sort of realization. And I'm very glad things happened the way they did, because for the longest time I was struggling. I was doing pretty okay with my sci-fi. I was making pretty decent money. I was getting some notoriety. I liked what I was doing. But there was always something. One of the things that bugged me was that people would read the sci-fi and they would really like it. I would have trouble with some people saying, "Oh, I don't read sci-fi." And then I'd have to go into that whole spiel of, well, it's really about the characters. You could put the characters in any setting and it'd be the same story. This just happens to have spaceships. And I thought, why am I fighting so hard with that? If I could put those characters in any setting and the story would essentially be the same, well, then why don't I just write it in a different setting? Why do I need the sci-fi? A lot of my thrillers involve an element of science fiction anyway. It's just that they're not called that. And so it's a little easier for me to approach readers with that.
That's a really interesting point. My theory tends to be that I'm going to write what entertains me, because we spend the most time with a story of anybody. And I want to be entertained by what I'm doing. And there's also this thing that if you write a story that you like, that is the only way that you can guarantee that at least one person loves that book. Because you never know, whether it's going to connect with other people or not. But if it connected with you, it did its initial job.
Right. And they did. I want to point out that I enjoyed what I was writing. The criticisms I would get from people who were avid sci-fi readers were always along the lines of, they expected it to be like author X, and it wasn't. And so they were disappointed, or it didn't contain enough of the spaceship. I didn't describe the spaceships or the science enough, or actually some people complained I described the science to too much detail. I had to dial that. That was my engineer coming out. Amusingly enough, I actually, in my Citadel series, I still count that among some of my best work, but I had written at length about certain aspects of quantum physics, and also had thrown in some principles of engineering. And funny enough, I would get readers who would praise the quantum physics, which is only kind of a hobby of mine, something I just sort of study from the side, but would tear down any of the engineering references, and I actually worked as an engineer. So, people are kind of funny, but I agree with you that you have to write the story that's going to keep you entertained. As pantsers, we have to think like this, right? We're discovery writers, so we're discovering the story the same way the reader would. We get the privilege of discovering it first. But you have to write the story that's going to engross you. And there's that quote: "No surprise in the author, no surprise in the reader." Right? I live by that as well. But I think that in my case, at least, yes, I could have kept writing sci-fi, and I would have loved the stories, but I don't think they would get the kind of reach that the thrillers have gotten. And when I started writing thrillers, it awakened a whole new love and joy within me for a type of story I didn't quite realize I wanted to tell. And so,
that's wonderful.
It was kind of an awakening sort of moment for me.
Do you have a saying that your mother or father used to always use that now you hear yourself using? Or do you have a favorite motivational, upbeat
I got so many
quote that you like to use?
Okay, one that I quote from my grandfather all the time, which I think is funny and poignant at the same time. But he says, I never got a thing I didn't ask for, even if it was a punch in the mouth. And now I've interpreted this over the years in several ways, but the way I currently interpret it is the results you got because you asked for them in some way.
You brought
everything to yourself. In one way or another, it all comes back to you. Take responsibility for who you are and what you're asking from the world. And so that, that's been a driving force with me. I really like, there's a quote from Zig Ziglar. He's not my father or mother or anything. But I mean, it's, the quote is,
we're going to have breaking news here, Kevin.
I think Mr. Ziglar, were he alive today, would be quite surprised. But the quote is, now it's going to blow right out of my head. Why? No, the quote is, you can have anything in life that you want as long as you're willing to help enough other people get what they want. And I think that quote and my grandfather's quote are linked intrinsically. If in no other way, they link within my soul, because the idea here is I get what I ask out of the world, for good or ill. If I want good in my life, I need to find ways to ask for that goodness. And you don't get goodness in your life by going out and being a complete, jackhat, right?
Well, and the Zig Ziglar is what you give.
Zig Ziglar is what you give.
One half, there's what you get and there's what you give.
Right.
And those two.
That's your way of asking the world for what you really want.
Yeah.
You ask for good things, positive things, successful things in your life by going out and making those things a reality for as many people as you can help. And that's been behind everything I've done for a very large part of my life and career. The Wordslinger podcast is about that. Yes, it is about me connecting with people for my own benefit, as a sort of ongoing virtual mastermind. But I share all of that very openly with anyone who wants to listen and grow from that. And I don't make any money from that. I make a little bit of money from that, but I could push it and I could turn that into a whole, revenue generating thing. But I haven't, because I don't want that to become a barrier. I want people to be able to use that material. And it doesn't hurt me to provide it. So I do. And, the other aspects of my work, I consider my writing the same way. The stories that I write are there to entertain not just me, but the whole world, anyone who's interested, which is why I don't get all that upset when people, because people will criticize them. And then, there's always that. I do get a little hurt by certain comments, but the first rule of Comment Club is you don't read the comments.
But it's hard sometimes. You're on that page and it just sort of grabs you.
In some respects, you kind of need it. I think it would be nice. And my wife, God bless her, and I love her. but she doesn't always get it when it comes to that stuff. Like she's like, well, I was reading about so-and-so who never reads any negative comments. He has somebody who goes and looks at that and they only give him the positive stuff. Well, there's two things about that. One, I don't have anybody do that for me. Do you want to do that for me? No, I don't want to do that. And I don't want to hire somebody specifically for that purpose. And two, every now and then, it's probably not a bad thing for somebody with an ego my size to be taken down a notch or two by a commenter, by a review or whatever. It's probably not a bad thing. It probably is a good thing for me to occasionally discover that, hey, 10 people wrote about this same problem that they found in my writing. So maybe I should work on fixing that problem,
Do you find that certain kinds of negative reviews strike you deeper to the soul than others? Is there a particular?
The ones that strike me deepest are the ones that are true. Because if some bonehead pops in to tell me how I'm just an awful writer, my books are aimed at teenagers. Some people have said that. I don't really care about that. That stuff doesn't bother me at all. The stuff that bothers me is when they say something that I don't want to be true, but I know deep down is true. It used to be the editing, because when I first started, I couldn't afford to pay editors. So I edited myself and the editing sucked, and, people would comment on the editing. People still comment on the editing, but they have no idea that in the meanwhile, I've paid thousands of dollars to editors and still had the same problems. And I've got a much better system, and a workflow for the editing, and it's better than ever, but there's still typos and stuff, so it's just one of those things the funny thing is that as time has gone by, comments about my editing don't bother me as much anymore, because I know now that there's just that there is a group out there that's going to be very nitpicky about certain things. So I look at recurring themes.
And see, the reviews that bother me the most are the ones that are not accurate and therefore not fair. Fairness is
no. Okay. All right. I would like to amend my answer then, because those bother me too. Now here's rule number 2 in Comment Club: never, ever, ever respond to a comment. Right? And my overwhelming urge, because I'm a writer and a talker, and I will blow you up if in the game of battleship of life. I will sink your battleship, but at what cost, right? So, because while you're tearing down loser A, who reviewed your book and said, I kid you not, somebody left a review on one of my sci-fi books early on that said it was driving Miss Daisy in space. And I'm like, there is nothing in this book that is remotely like that.
I kind of like
well,
that.
Well, now
actually.
I want to write that book, but at the time...
I think you should.
And another was more recently on my thrillers. Someone read the second thriller in my series and said, I started to read this one because I really enjoyed the first one. Within the first 2 chapters or so, it was already the exact same book. He just changed the name of the girl who got kidnapped. And so I read the whole book. There's a completely the same book. And I'm like, no, there was no kidnapped girl in the second book. There was no kidnapped.
Yeah.
I mean,
that would drive me nuts. And that's partly, I think, my journalism background, inaccuracies, but I have to say my very, very favorite review I've ever had was, it was on Amazon. It was for a book, and it said, yes, this whitens my teeth.
Yeah.
And there was a whole review about how his teeth were whiter. And I was telling one of the Amazon representatives that I had this whole great idea for a marketing campaign all around this review. And they took it out. They removed the review. I thought that was so mean. Not only was it a good read, it whitened your teeth.
3 out of 4 dentists recommend. So I've had reviews like that. I've had reviews like 1 star, did not read. 1 star, I don't read this kind of book, things like that. And I do think those are unfair.
1 star, it
It froze.
froze.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like that guy.
Yes.
I saw him on. I saw someone retweeted or reposted his post on Facebook. He's an author. He says, the next time you're fretting about a bad review, just remember I got a 1-star review because my book was not a 36 pack of Owen's sausages, and it was. He posted the review saying, I ordered a 36 pack of Owen's sausages and it never arrived. 1 star.
And then there are the reviews that, at least for me, that it's like, it's the Sally Field moment. They like me. They really like me. Yeah. And they got it. And they are responding to what meant the most to me in the book.
But again,
that's like, my gosh.
Do not respond to the review. As much as you want to gush and thank them, all it does is make you look desperate and weak. But yes, I do love those. Thankfully, I get plenty of those in my inbox. People will email me.
And I hope the listeners and the readers know how much that means.
Oh yeah,
to authors.
That's such a big deal. People have no idea, and it's funny to me because when I first started, now I respond to every email I get. Now it's getting tougher. Okay, when you get into the like hundreds of thousands of people reading and writing and emailing you, now it's getting tough. But when I first started, I was verbose, in my responses. And sometimes I still am, but now I struggle because I don't want to send a perfunctory kind of, thanks for reading. I don't want to do that. I want to take the time to let them know I not only did I read and understand what you wrote, I'm responding to the content of that email. That can be tough to do and very time consuming, but I will tell you this. I recently changed sort of the way I market my books. Like I took down all my Facebook ads and all that stuff. I'll get back to that eventually, but I took all that stuff down and I've spent the past, I started in January. So I've spent the past 3 months, and the only way I market my work is I talk to my existing readers in my mailing list. And I answer every email, and I write emails, each week that say, here's what I'm doing right now. And I stopped all the marketing stuff in them. Like I took all the slick, because I'm a marketer. I do marketing work, for Draft to Digital, but I took all that stuff out and I'm just talking to them. And here, the weird thing is how people like to be talked to as if they are people. That's the oddest thing, right? But what I discovered was that now I'm connecting with these readers. I've been watching sales go up ever since. My engagement with those emails has gone through the roof. Overall, it's just better for an author to connect with readers like other human beings. Treat people with respect, treat people with kindness and love, and they'll do the same for you. It does take time,
Well, and here's, as a fellow pantser, two things. I tend not to talk far ahead about what I'm writing because it changes so much. It is one thing when you pantser. And the other thing is I can talk out a story. It satisfies my need to tell the story. And then it's like, okay, let's go play with something else.
Right.
So when you say this is what I'm doing in your newsletters,
this is what I'm doing in life. Like I will talk about, now I don't like send them a journal entry or something. I just say, for example, today I sent an email to my list and I said, my wife and I are moving at the end of the month, so packing is a big deal. It was I try to make 2 to 3 points in an email, and I make it very conversational and personable. But so I talked about the move a little. I talked about how our home is a wreck right now, and that drives me crazy. I like order. I talked about have you, by any chance, if you've read, Girl in the Mayan Tomb, that's my latest book, would you mind going and reviewing it? Now that's an ask, right? So I sandwich those in between things. And so the next thing I wrote was, and this isn't a super long email. It's like a page or page and a half, but the next thing was, by the way, I just did a refresh of all of my covers for 2 of my series. And here they are in little strips that you can look at. Tell me what you think. And because I write archaeological thrillers, there's a secret clue hidden in one of these images,
Wow.
And so, and that's just, it's just, I'm having fun, and I'm connecting with the readers, and the readers will write me back. And what's really amazing to me is when they'll write to me to answer a question from my email, and I'll write them back, and their heads will explode because they had no idea that I was going to write back to them. Like they'll thank me for taking the time to write them, And I'm like, well, of course I wrote. You took the time to write to me. I mean, I want you to know how much I appreciate that. So that relationship is the best marketing tool an author can have. I swear to God, that's the best marketing you're ever going to do, is to cultivate that kind of relationship with your reader. And the readers just appreciate it. And if you're going to be appreciative and thankful to anybody, you should be thankful to your readers.
Well, that's very true. But okay, and here is a question from a reader. Where do your stories come from? I know one author who dreams her stories. Another has a character suddenly taking up residence in her head. So how are your beautiful stories born?
So as I traipse about in the world, going about my life, I read things, I watch something on television, I overhear snatches of conversation, and before I know it, I'm asking myself, what if? And once I've got that what if in my head, I've got a book. And the saddest part about my writing career is that I have far more ideas than I'm going to be able to write before I die. So I am never going to run out of ideas. I mean, it's impossible. I get new ones all the time, and I sometimes I hate putting some on the back burner, but then I'll get a story in my head that I think this is the one. Like it'll just resonate and say, it'll hit me as special. The one I'm working on right now hit me right in the middle of writing Mayan Tomb. Actually, no, it hit me before that. It hit me way back when I wrote Devil's Interval and then Girl in the Mayan Tomb. During Devil's Interval, I had the idea for this book, and I actually wrote elements into that book to set up the story. And then in Mayan Tomb, I continued that, and now I'm paying that off.
But where did that initial idea come from? Do you know?
It started with, I have for my birthday way back in 2010, my wife gave me a compass to put on my desk, an old vintage looking compass.
Oh, cool.
That's part of it. It started with, while researching for the first thriller I wrote, The Coelho Medallion, it involves Vikings in North America. And I came across the idea of something called a sunstone, which they use for navigation. That was part of it. It started with me reading an article about the Piri Reis map, which is the sort of almost it's almost mythological in proportion, but it was a map that they believe is a world map, and they believe it has an image of Antarctica prior to it being covered in ice and snow, when it was a more temperate climate.
Oh.
So these little elements, along with a few thousand other little elements along the way, they were each a piece. And then while writing Devil's Interval, I wrote like some casual phrase about the girl who was the villain in the previous book who got away. And I wrote this little casual phrase and thought, oh, but she's after this. She's doing this. That's what she's after. And I realized
Yeah.
I can set that up in this book, but that's not this book's story. But I've got a rare opportunity now to set up a book that I won't write for another 2 books, you know? And so it became this evolving story. And while I was writing those 2 books, this 3rd book's been sitting here waiting for me, you know, and growing in proportion. Now I'm hoping I'm not like overselling it, because I don't want everybody to think, wow, he put some time into this one. I'm not putting any more time into it than I put in every other book I write. But these elements have been growing for, decades, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes they do germinate.
Yeah. And I think that's what
it takes
really...
different stories have different germination periods.
And writers take inspiration from all over the place. Some writers do get their inspiration from dreams, but I guarantee you that author who gets their his or her stories from dreams, that's the kernel, but the rest of the pieces came from other parts of that writer's life. And that's how all writers are. I mean, in my experience, and I've talked to thousands of writers by this point, I've interviewed hundreds for my show alone. Most writers, they have a love for gathering little bits of books from every corner of their life. They hear a really interesting turn of phrase. They see something unique in a store, a shop on, while they're on vacation. They hear a snatch of lyrics from a piece of music they've never heard before. And, over time, these little things kind of add up. Some of them get dropped. Some of them just fade.
Yeah.
Some of them lose kind of their integrity, a little. But eventually, enough of these pieces sort of congeal, and they form, if not the entire story, enough of the story that the writer can begin. That's my experience.
Another reader's question might segue into this, and she asks if when you finish a book, do you find that yourself thinking about the characters? Do you miss them after the book is over? And does that ever then lead to a subsequent book?
My characters are living, breathing human beings. I mean, they stick with me. Sometimes I'll have little mental conversations with Dan Kotler, and they do what they're going to do. They live all on their own. The books that I have completed, those characters have gone on and done stuff that I don't even know about. And if I were to dip back into their worlds, I would be able to pick right up with the current thing they're working on, which would be so far, it would just be completely out of my this landscape of my imagination. Like they live and they continue to do things behind my back. And they do that while I'm writing too. So it's not really that far out there. This is how I'm just recording their story, as it unfolds. My characters, but that, I'm a character writer. The plot doesn't matter as much to me as the character does, and the trouble I've always had, there is a, sort of a philosophy of craft that, a story is a character changing from beginning to end. And I think that change is far more gradual than that in real life. So why would I compress it quite so much in the course of a story, depending on the length of the story? Most of my books now involve characters who they do change. Kotler has changed since we first met him. Roland Denzel has changed even more. And, but that's been over the course of, this is the 5th book. I think I'm working on the 6th book now, I believe. Maybe I've got that wrong. I'm working on the 5th. I've done some novellas in here, so it's thrown off my count. But, over the course of those books, the characters do change in subtle ways, but they're not dramatically different. And I don't think anyone wants them to be. I think we read a series in particular because we are in love with who that character is. If you went to Indiana Jones and he had a personal crisis that changed who he was from the beginning of that movie to the next, to the beginning of the next, then you might not watch the next because you tuned in and you enjoyed Raiders of the Lost Ark and Temple of Doom, and I almost lost street cred because I couldn't remember the second Indiana Jones movie for a second there.
But there's also yes, you want that core of who the character is to and their
if you're writing a one-off
standards.
story.
Well, but I'm thinking about how he changed even like the one with
Right.
Sean Connery plays his father, and there were different notes struck in that showed different aspects of him, and I think development. I know it wasn't very popular.
I love that movie. Actually, people give that movie gets a bad rap, but I have a counter to that though. I think what's changing is not the character, but it is our perception of the character. We learn more about Indiana Jones over the course of those 3 films. He didn't actually change. If you really pay attention to who he was at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark and who he is at the end of the Sean Connery one, why is Kevin's brain blanking out on movies he loves and adores? But I don't want the letters, okay? But if you pay attention, he is essentially and effectively the same rogue kind of character. But our perception of him changes because we learn more about him in each film over the course of each film.
Because we're talking about the characters. When the cover image doesn't match the character description, and this reader says it's a pet peeve, how does it feel to the author?
So I don't have this problem for 2 reasons. One, I rarely feature the character's image on the covers.
Yeah, me either.
And I make my own covers, so I have control over that. But the other side of that is that I rarely have any humans on my covers anyway, unless they're in deep shadow or something. However, I did have when I first published my young adult books, my young adult fantasy novels, Sawyer Jackson was the main character, and I found some stock images of a model who favored him in all the ways I wanted him to look. And I was very careful about selecting that. I wanted, because I thought this kid's going to represent everyone's vision of this character. So he needs to look as close as I can make him look. I didn't bother describing Sawyer's eye color or any of that. I actually don't go into a lot of detail about what the characters look like. And that is, in most ways, deliberate, because one of my favorite things. So I'm a longtime big huge comic book fan. I read Spider-Man, was my favorite superhero growing up and still is. And one of the things that I've heard someone at some point, and Stan Lee has said this as well. Stan Lee created Spider-Man along with Jack Kirby, and he said that one of the things that made Spider-Man very popular was that you under that full body costume and that mask, it could be anybody, any race, any gender, handsome, ugly, missing an eye, whatever. It didn't really matter. What mattered was you could identify, when we read that character, we put ourselves in that character's head. We put ourselves in that costume. We are Spider-Man, right? So one of the things I've always tried to do with my fiction is write characters who have qualities that we can resonate with, who do phenomenal things that we can feel excited about. But I want them to read these characters as if not just as if they're standing back and watching them on screen or something, which a lot of my readers say that's their experience. I think that's odd. I think that I'm always surprised by that, because I've literally had people tell me, they'll say in reviews how much they loved the fact that I was just so detailed and descriptive. And I'm like, I gave you no details. I said nothing about that character. But the wonders of that kind of fiction and the way you set up the characters, because I have that character, you discover that character through his thoughts and actions, right? And
Mm-hmm.
eventually the reader forms a picture of that character in their head, and that becomes that character. And then they can see all the details. So they're the ones that deserve the credit for all that detail. They filled that in. When it comes to putting that image on the cover, I really don't want to do that, because I don't want to suggest to the reader that this is what the character is. Right.
Short circuit.
I want that reader to have that experience. And I actually had someone, a consultant, criticize my covers at one point because they said that I needed to feature people, because their research showed that readers really resonate with buying a book that has a cover with a human face on it. And I agree. I agree that that's true. But I feel like I want readers who come in ready to discover that character. I don't necessarily want the readers who have to be handheld into the book. Like, they have to find that character attractive, or they're not going to read about them. They have to,
I think that's a really, well, it's taking us in a really interesting direction, in that there are readers who are right for different writers, and vice versa. That it's very much a match of whether you fit.
Yeah, it comes back to that personal and personable relationship that we talked about earlier. When I write, the advice for writers, and this, Stephen King talks about that in his sort of Bible on writing, called On Writing, that you should have an ideal reader. And my ideal reader is basically me, because honestly, and this isn't a joke necessarily, but it is kind of funny. I mean, I would write these books. I will write these books. If no one ever buys another copy of my books, I'm going to keep writing and publishing them. If I have to work at Walmart to support me and my wife, I will do that. I will do that 6 or 7 days a week. And then on my lunch breaks, I will keep writing books. And that's just what my life is now. So I am that reader. I will feed that need. But I think that I have a taste and I have the things that I resonate with. I think that is not universal, but I think there is a large group of people out there that appreciate the same things. So me being my own ideal reader has helped me tailor my work to appeal to a certain demographic of people. And those are the people I write for. Everyone else is welcome. But I'm not writing for everyone.
It comes back to writing the book that pleases you, so then for sure one person likes it. And then you go out and hope to find more who will like it.
Yeah, we all have very similar tastes when it comes to certain things. We know what's popular and what people like. I don't by any means recommend authors should write to what's popular or what the current fads are. But I think that writers should certainly look around and see what's resonating with people, what sort of stories are people really interested in, because whatever you like to write, no matter what type of story you like to write, you can craft that kind of story for a market, and you can reach out to the right readers for that story. I just believe that.
Well, here's another question from a reader. If you could write a book with any author, alive or dead, who would you want to work with and why?
Okay. I have actually thought about this before. 2 people that I think would be interesting to work with and also infuriating. And I also think that I would infuriate them to the point of stabbing me. But I would write with J.K. Rowling.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I would love to write something with J.K. Rowling, and I would love to write something with Neil Gaiman. Now, if you'll take note, both of them are British, and neither of them writes thrillers.
Huh. And what would you feel that you would learn from each of them?
For one, they both have such a strong sense of self. They both know themselves so well and they are both very comfortable with that. I want to learn that. I want to learn. They both also have such deep and rich relationships with their readers, and I want to cultivate that within myself. So it really has nothing at all to do with their genre and what they write. It really has nothing to do with that, because as much as I love reading both of their works, I mean, I read Harry Potter. I read Casual Vacancy, so I like J.K. Rowling stuff. I've read, American Gods and Anansi Boys, and practically everything that Neil Gaiman's ever written. As much as I enjoyed that, and I can write in those genres, those aren't the genres that necessarily appeal to me as a writer. But the way they craft a story is engrossing, and so I want to know. I want to experience that with somebody who does it that way, and the way that they comport themselves. I mean, what I really want to learn from these writers it has almost nothing to do with craft and nothing to do with marketing and nothing to do with any of that. I want to learn to be a human being who writes and is similar to these people. I mean, it doesn't hurt things at all that J.K. Rowling is the world's first billionaire author. That doesn't hurt at all, but that isn't even what I'm after. I just, after having I watch a lot of author interviews. Okay. I watch these people and I think, they are living the author lifestyle that I truly want to live. Neil Gaiman, probably not as much as J.K. Rowling. Neil Gaiman is kind of an oddball if you really start paying attention to him. But I do like his sort of quiet, sort of reserved sort of approach to his fame, his dignity when it comes to his fame. That I appreciate. Don't necessarily like his lifestyle per se. I mean, he's kind of living off with his very famous wife, off in the woods somewhere. He travels a lot, I mean, he's kind of got a rock star kind of thing going on, honestly. But J.K. Rowling, on the other hand, is very dedicated to her family, particularly her daughter. This, even though she is the most famous writer on the planet. So I think part of me wants to completely understand how, their dignity in this. So that if I do reach that level, which I intend to reach, but if I do reach that level, I want someone to be sitting on a podcast one day and say, the author I'd like to write with is Kevin Tumlinson. And I want to do it because of the way he comports himself and the way he talks to his readers and the way he cares. That's what I want to hear about myself someday. I won't hear it though, because I don't listen to those podunk little podcasts anymore.
You're just a troublemaker. So which of your books is the best place for a reader who's new to you to start?
If you were interested in the archaeological thrillers, I say jump all the way back to Coelho Medallion, or as some people call it, Coelho Medallion. The name, by the way, it was because the book was written on a dare. I made it kind of an inside joke, and the name Coelho is for Paulo Coelho, the author of The Alchemist, one of my favorite books. The protagonist is named Dan Kotler, named for Dan Brown and another author whose last name is Kotler. And by sheer coincidence, by the way, there is a character named Roland Denzel in the books, and I actually am good friends now with an author named Roland Denzel. They have nothing to do with each other. I didn't know Roland before I wrote this character, so he actually was not meant to be an author name, but it just worked out that way. But that's a good one to start if you're interested in the archaeological thrillers. It's recently I've gone back, and I believe in a process I call iterative publishing, meaning that I get my work to the best possible quality I can make it with the resources I have at that moment in time, and then I can come back and fix things later as I gain more resources. Someone tells me they've spotted a typo, whatever. I can go fix that. That's the advantage of being an indie publisher. The books get better over time. So, and I now use a little tool in my books. I'm starting to put it in all the books. I'm slowly going through and putting it in all of them. It's called my typo reporter, so that people can basically log in and if they spot a typo, they can drop it into my typo reporter, and I will put their name in the back of that book when I release a new edition later.
Oh, that's nice. I have had a message in my books for a long time saying, if you spot a typo, please spare future readers by letting me know. But I don't have a tool. I just have my email address.
You should check it out. So. Yeah. So yeah, no, I would recommend that. And you can get that book for free, just between me and everyone. You can get that book for free if you go on my website and you get on my mailing list. It means you're going to get those personable emails from me.
There you go.
But
that's a great way to check out. If the reader and you are a good match.
That's right.
So
and that's the point. And then right now, that is the book that I offer. If you are more into science fiction, you can check out my Citadel series. You can also people have really enjoyed, like I have a book called Evergreen, which has I need to go back and I'm going to do a rewrite of that book because it's got some issues. That book was written in one day. It was at the time, it was a 60,000 word book I wrote in one day just to see if I could do it. And it's now more like 80,000 words after, edits and rewrites and what have you. But it's got some typos and things that I need to go back and fix. So I'll be going back through that at some point in the near future. But that's a fun one. That's a fun sort of, I don't really know quite how to describe it. It's like if you've ever read Dean Koontz, he writes paranormal thrillers, and this is kind of along the lines of one of those. So it's a little bit like that. But yeah. And then, of course, my Sawyer Jackson books are YA fantasy, which a lot of people really enjoy.
So tell readers where they can find out more about you and about your books.
All things Kevin are available on kevintumlinson.com. That's my author site. And you can find,
and it's TUM.
Yes, TUMLINSON. Kevin.
Yes.
Yeah.
How often does that get wrong?
105 times out of 100.
But folks, we will also have the link in the show notes.
Right.
So
if you there's another Kevin Tumlinson that I've met on Facebook.
Really?
And that guy has no shot whatsoever at a presence online.
Of course.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna finish up here, Kevin, with the lightning round.
Okay.
Quick either ors. Appetizer or dessert?
Appetizer.
And because I'm ignoring that, ice cream or cake?
Ice cream.
Dark chocolate or white chocolate?
Dark chocolate.
Okay. Pickup or sports car?
Oh gosh, pickup.
Hiking boots or cowboy boots?
Hiking boots.
House decorating or gardening?
House decorating.
Paint or wallpaper?
Paint.
Thank you. As somebody who's removed a lot of wallpaper in my life. Binge watch or make the watching last as long as possible?
Binge watch.
Cruise or trekking vacation?
Trekking.
Hot air balloon or train trip?
Train.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Cat or dog?
Dog. Used to be cat.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Ketchup or mustard?
Ketchup.
Take the best first or save the best for last?
Save the best for last.
All right. Thank you so much, Kevin. It's been a delight having this time to talk with you. And we hope the listeners will come back next week to hear another author as we talk about the stories behind the stories. Have a great week of happy reading. That's the show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for joining Authors Love Readers podcast. Remember, you can always find out more about our guest authors in the show notes, and you can find out more about me at www.patriciamclinn.com. You can also send in questions to be asked of future authors at podcast@authorslovereaders.com. Until next week, wishing you lots of happy reading. Bye. If you like this podcast, we hope you'll consider becoming a supporter through our Patreon page. With a small monthly donation as little as $1 a month, you can help with the hosting and editing costs that make the show possible. To thank our Patreon supporters, we offer them special bonuses. Find out more at authorslovereaders.com or at patreon.com/authorslovereaders. That's PATREON. We also hope you'll subscribe to this podcast and leave us a review wherever you listen to us. Both of those help more folks find the podcast. Of course, the very best way for other folks to find the podcast is for you to tell them about it. So we sure hope you will.